Welcome to the Dork Forest. Jackie and her pals will never bore us. Shameless confessions
about our obsession
will make us laugh and smile. So let's explore the Dork Forest and dork out for a while.
Hi, Rangers. It's me, Jackie Kashian. Welcome to the Dork Forest. It's 2024. Let's do this. Here's the credits, of course. Mike Ruekberg sang that song at the beginning, and he wrote that song, and he sang it with Sarah Cohen, his wife, and he will sing the Mexican hat dance at the end of the program. Also, Patrick Brady, still putting this together. Video, audio, all of it. He's amazing. So, and Vilmos doing JackieKashianStore.com. Squarespace is doing the regular Jackie Kashian page, and I'm thinking of moving the Dork Forest and dorkforest.com away from WordPress because it's driving me nuts. But those are the credits. But if you go to JackieKashian.com, you can get Dork Forest merch. You can get my stand-up merch. You can get my stand-up CDs and DVDs, which you'd have to have devices for those. You can also see videos and find out any number of things. I have another podcast called The Jackie and Laurie Show, but the Dork Forest is the flagship. 18th year. We're doing it, you guys. You can go to my Bandcamp or my YouTube for extra content. Please donate, is what I'm saying. It's 2024, and I think we've been in this long enough. Why don't you guys, everybody send me $100? That's what I'd like you to do. You can PayPal me. There's links all over the pages. You can Venmo me at Jackie Kashian. You can find me at a stand-up show and hand me a sweaty wad of 20s. Do something. But I love doing the show. I would love to make some money, is what I'd like to do. In other news, I'm sure there's more things that I should talk about, but I can't think of them. But let's listen to who's going to dork out about something, because that's my favorite part. Thanks for listening, you guys. You're all great. Let's get into the show. Hello, Rangers of the Dork Forest. It's me, Jackie Kashian. I'm in my garage. This week, I'm excited about it. I've always wanted one. Here on the Dork Forest, and it's a watch dork. Arthur Trace. That's not how nobody's ever called you that and been like, oh, how cool. Anyway, Arthur Trace, I met you. I think it was at the Comedy and Magic Club.
You did. And just to back up, we're called Watch Idiot Savants. So
Watch Idiots. Wait, is that real? Because it should be.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, you go on any sort of watch forum, and that's what we're called.
All right. I say, of course, own the badge. I say, get the badge of honor going. Magician, you are a magician, as in addition to being funny, and you do Comedy and Magic Club regular?
Yeah. I'm actually there next weekend, so semi-regular. Whenever the schedule allows for it. I just like to, as everyone likes to keep the chops polished up.
Right, keep a hand in. See what they're doing down there in Hermosa Beach. And then the Magic Castle, I know you're a member there, and you perform there regularly.
Yeah.
I believe.
They just actually bestowed their highest honor on me, Stage Magician of the Year, so.
Hey, you guys, my relationship with magic is very complicated. I love it so. And in some ways, I am friends with a guy named Derek Hughes, who I'm sure you also know very well.
Derek was at my wedding. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. He's a Minneapolis guy. So, and he, in some ways, I'm just a simpleton where I'm just like, make it happen. Make it go away and come back. And so Derek, I do love magic.
Yeah, Derek is a very funny magician. I've never really considered myself a comedy magician because I think in order to consider yourself a comedy magician, the comedy has to be just as good as the magic. And most magicians, and it's become cliche, most magicians that call themselves comedy magicians, they're either not very funny, but they're also not very good magicians. But it's like
right, they're slapping both of us. Yeah. So you consider yourself a magician who is personable on stage.
Yeah. I'm your best friend on stage.
That's great. Maria, one of my best friends, Maria Bamford, she jokes that she would like to be introduced as a melanoma survivor with an announcement, because then it lowers the bar.
And you got your empathy right there. So
that's it. They're going to be they're not going to expect it to be hilarious. So, but it's Arthur Trace, TRACE.com. And it's at Arthur Trace on Instagram and all the things. So check him out. Do that. But I actually do want to talk about watches because I put my watch on. It's a Seiko.
Hey, don't knock Seiko. We'll talk about Seiko. That's a great brand.
There. Let's. But what do you want to start with? What do you know anything about sundials? How far back should we go?
Well, they're reliant on the sun. That's about it.
It's all about shadows.
We can start pretty much anywhere. Watches are such a fascinating thing because in the age of the smartphone, everybody says, "Well, why the hell do you need a wristwatch to tell the time?" And it's honestly, you don't. You certainly don't. But that's not what they're there for in this day and age.
I hard agree.
Yeah, they're just mechanical marvels, and there's so many ways of appreciating them. From my background being a magician, and this goes back hundreds of years to the people like Jacques Edreau, who founded the Jacques Edreau Atelier, where he would make automaton and various automata with the mechanical watches that he would work on.
What year was this? When was this?
This is 1700s.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then a century before that, well, before we even established that sort of foundation, me being a magician, there's plenty of magicians that used to be watchmakers. And one very famous one was Robert Houdin, who Houdini got his name from. So
really?
Robert Houdin was a very famous magician who basically was the father of essentially modern magic, and he was the mid 1800s. But he was he started out as a watchmaker, and then he also dealt with automaton like Jacques Edreau.
Is it because magic is somebody putting a device somewhere that has that goes tick tick tick, and then all of a sudden something happens, like a rabbit jumps out? Or I know the simpleton that I am when it comes to magic. I mean, no disrespect.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally cool. It's coming in from that perspective because I see the opposite. The other side of how my audience actually views a magician's performance. It depends on the magician. So
it's magical. It's literally, I'm sitting there going, how, where, how did it? Okay.
Well, so. I think that's why, and correct me if I'm wrong, because there's a lot of prop comics, that get certainly a bad rap from comedians because they just bring out this prop and it may get a laugh, but it's generally like a cheap laugh. It's not a quality laugh.
I was a child and I was very angry for a heartbeat before I did stand-up comedy at Gallagher for doing stand-up on the Tonight Show in front of a giant couch. I was like, yeah, you put a giant couch behind anyone, we're all going to laugh at that. There's no writing there.
I did a corporate event once with Gallagher, but that's another story for another time.
I worked with his brother, Gallagher too. So you're cooler.
hey, that's the way you scale, I guess, as a comedian, right?
Right, if you have somebody that you could franchise your act to. Yes. Yeah,
or you're like Blue Man Group. But anyway, so with magic, I mean, there's different magicians. So there's essentially the comic magicians like Derek Hughes, who's both equally funny comedian and also a very strong sleight of hand magician. There's somebody like me that's a sleight of hand magician. I've got a certain personality on stage that kind of comes across as your best friend up there. But I also deal with, in my act, all the things that I involve in my performance are handmade by me. So in that perspective, I don't consider myself a prop magician because the things that I'm working with, I consider more so my instruments that I engineer in my garage. And that's kind of where like this whole fascination with timekeeping, mechanical devices, and especially as far as the watch is concerned, such a tiny mechanical computer on your wrist, like to me, that's magic. So when bringing up these magicians like Robert Houdin, I feel I'm kind of cut from the same cloth.
Okay. But Houdin himself came from watch people. He came from watchmakers himself.
So he studied watchmaking. And at a fairly early age decided, you know what, he wanted to be a performing magician. And as hard as that is nowadays, it was even harder back then because he came from a very traditional family and especially an upper class family.
Oh, was their tradition having jobs and not being a magician? That's what it makes me think of.
Well, Jackie, back then you couldn't just do your own podcast, or you couldn't have your own YouTube channel. You actually had to go and have a mentor and actually go through like the ranks of the whole thing. So
was there the guild? Was there a magician's guild?
Not so much a magician's guild, but certainly a watchmaking guild. Yeah.
Okay, because magician's guild, more Dungeons and Dragons, less. Okay, so he went through the watchmaking. He wanted to be a watchmaker, but then he wanted to be a magician.
So he started off as a watchmaker, and then he went the magic route through making these automaton. So if you actually look up Robert Houdin, he actually has some very interesting impossible objects. So like there's one clock where the hands, essentially the hands are on this crystal dial or glass dial, so you don't actually see the mechanics of how it works, but it still is able to tell the time. So how are these two hands able to move and accurately tell the time if you don't see any sort of mechanics behind it working? So things of that nature.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing.
So you bringing up sundials, I mean, we can go back all the way to the 1400s when clocks were starting to be used by very wealthy people. But it wasn't until the mid 1600s where this Dutch scientist invented something called the balance wheel. And the balance wheel, so his name is Christian. And I may be butchering his last name. Is Huygens, Christian Huygens.
Fairness, yeah.
Huygens, however you pronounce that. He invented the pendulum for the clock. But the balance wheel is also essentially a type of pendulum, and he also invented something called the balance wheel. Up until that time, timekeeping was very inaccurate. So you could have a watch that was off by 10 hours a day.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so once the balance wheel was invented by Christian, and actually there's some debate around this for a British physicist by the name of Robert Hooke, who around the same time invented something similar to the balance wheel. But anyway, so he came up with this thing called the balance wheel and the balance spring or hairspring that's connected to the balance wheel. And what that did is it counteracted and I'm getting really techie and dorky here.
Yeah. Please. But you're in a safe space, my friend. Okay.
So it acted a way to combat the effects of isochronism, which basically is when the mainspring of a watch, when you wind it up, it's this big spring inside something that's called a barrel. And so when you wind the crown, you're basically tightening the spring.
Right.
And then over time, that spring releases energy, and that energy grows through a bunch of gears down through to the hands of the watch or the dial side.
This is how a watch works.
This is how a watch works.
And the tightness and I'm sure there's math involved with how big the spring is for it to be a second, and then all of a sudden 60 times, which is why you have to wind your watch every day.
Yeah, well,
unless you have a battery or
not every, like, this is a watch that has 8 days of power reserve. So so basically it has a huge mainspring in it. So if you wind it once every 8 days, and it will last 8 days before you have to wind it again. And so there's different mechanical movements going back to the whole spring and how watches became a lot more accurate, or timekeeping became a lot more accurate once Christian invented something called the balance and the hairspring.
Right.
That made watches back in the day in the mid 1600s accurate to within like 10 minutes in a day, which was a huge leap. And from that point on, there was a bunch of inventions, and you had guys like Abraham Louis Breguet in the late 1700s who were kind of like, I won't say the Elon Musk, but the Teslas of the Nikola Teslas of the world. That were really just smart and innovative in such a way that really just propelled watchmaking to the stratosphere.
But it took 100 years of Christensen stuff where everyone just sort of used that and like modified that and worked with that. And then 100 years later, there was sort of a jump in the development of the watch.
It was the balance spring and balance wheel that really was the kind of
And
the jumping
tiny.
off point.
Was that for clocks or was that for watches? Because
So it was for clocks because the wristwatch, which was known as a wristlet back in the day,
okay,
the first wristwatch it's proposed that it was invented by Breguet in 1810 for the Queen of Naples. It wasn't until the early 1900s and trench warfare, World War One, where wristwatches actually became a thing because soldiers couldn't take out a pocket watch in the trenches and give up their location because the sun hit their pocket watch, and
right.
that gave up the location to the enemy. Like, let's bomb here, right?
Right. So they're all looking at but they had to sort of synchronize the fighting or whatever. So I did actually, in some historical fiction novel that I read, did learn that wristwatches were made popular during World War One, that they were given to soldiers in the trenches so that they could sort of orchestrate when they're all supposed to go die. Yes, I vaguely remember. Yes.
Yeah. And back, So essentially, yeah, you're right. That's essentially when it became popular to actually wear. Well, not popular, but that was like the jumping off point of watches as wristwatches, because everything back before then was basically pocket watches.
Okay.
And there's a whole bunch of other developments of like keyless winding, because back in the day, you would wind a pocket watch with a key, and it was only in the mid 1800s where those pocket watches were starting to be wound just by the crown.
Okay, which is what the I don't know what did I call it before, now that I know it's called a crown. I don't know what I called it. I think I just called it the spinny thing, or the wheel.
The thingamajig on the side.
The thingamajig on the spinny. To spin the thing so that the watch works. But my
exactly.
watch, I don't think I don't have to spin it. I don't think. What I mostly use it for is to change the time or date if I need to change the time or date, time zone wise.
So I'm not exactly sure the watch you're wearing, but is it a quartz watch?
I don't know. It is gold.
Does it need a battery?
It does need a battery.
So yeah, that's a quartz watch. Yeah, it's a very nice watch. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super cute.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, it's a very cool watch.
As long as I could see it on stage, just so. I used to wear a much larger watch with bigger numbers, and then they became less popular. And so I went nuts and said to myself, I'm going to buy a second watch. And now I own 2 watches, Arthur Trace.
You went nuts.
How many watches do you, just ballpark me? How many watches you got?
So I'm not a collector. I don't own a lot of watches. I've got like 5 watches. I don't, I'm like, there's collectors out there that have, hundreds upon hundreds of watches.
Yeah.
So I'm not really one to accumulate and collect things on that level. I like to understand things, and I like to have nice examples. So like I'm wearing this watch here.
Right.
It's a Jaeger LeCoultre Reverso.
Ooh.
And this is what's cool.
Foreign.
What's cool about this watch?
Yes.
It has a second dial.
What?
Yeah.
Wait.
So
like for nighttime?
This is a second time zone.
Oh.
Yeah.
What? And it just flips.
And it just flips. So like that.
Oh, okay. Consider me interested. Okay.
So this is a watch produced by a company called Jaeger LeCoultre.
Okay. How do you spell that?
Or as Americans like to say, Jaeger.
Oh my God. Jaeger?
Yeah, you got it. And LeCoultre is LeCoultre.
Okay.
And Jaeger LeCoultre was founded by Anton LeCoultre in the early 1800s. And then in the 1900s, a guy by the name of Jaeger partnered with him, and they became Jaeger LeCoultre.
Okay. I get it. But they've been around since the 1800s making watches.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of a second time zone. I mean, granted, I travel between 3, so that's possibly... I could change it. That's not bad.
And that's a cool complication to have, and you can have this is a dual face. So this is that complication. But, if you don't have 2 faces for a watch, there's something called the GMT, Grandmaster Time. And it's just basically a second hour hand around the dial. So that's a complication that's very useful if you travel a lot.
Yeah.
And if you travel a heck of a lot, there's something called the world timer. And basically it shows the time in basically all the major cities around the world.
Wait, but not digital and not, it's all done on the face.
It's all done it's a mechanical computer on your wrist. And the dial side of the watch has all the various cities like Cairo, London, Paris, Chicago. And you can tell the time based.
What's that one called? World?
It's a world timer, and there's various different brands that make a world timer. Like Patek Philippe is a wonderful, very expensive brand that makes a very very famous world time watch. That's
okay.
Is a flagship of theirs. But yeah, that's a world timer complication. But anyway, back to your watch, because I find people that are first getting into watches.
Sure.
They're like, really? That is a mechanic? Like, how does it work? So like your watch is a quartz. It's basically where it runs off of it's battery powered and has a quartz crystal in it. And so the quartz is what basically creates the electronic beat or heartbeat in that watch.
Okay.
A traditional mechanical watch, or the old school way that watchmakers used to make watches, in the same way that this one's made. This one's a hand wound watch. So basically, I wind it, and I have to wind it every couple of days because I think the power reserve is about a little over 2 days. And the power reserve of a watch is basically how long the mainspring takes to wind down once you wound it all the way.
Right.
So this is a hand wound watch. There's also something called an automatic, and this is an automatic right here, and basically it has a rotor, or I don't know if you can see that moving.
Right.
It's kind of hard to see, but there's a little flip. There's a little half moon thing on the back there you can kind of see moving.
Yeah.
So that when this is on the wrist, as my wrist moves, it moves the rotor, and the rotor, the energy that's created by the movement of my wrist moves the rotor, and the rotor then in turn winds the mainspring. That's called an automatic watch.
Okay, so there's a quartz watch, which is what I've got. There's a mechanical watch, and then there's an automatic watch.
So automatic is basically also a mechanical watch.
Okay.
There's just essentially two types of mechanical watches. There's the hand wound, and then there's the automatic.
That's it. Hand wound, and then the automatic. Got it.
And then your company, the same watch brand that you're wearing, actually created something called Spring Drive. So Spring Drive watch is a mechanical watch, but with I think it's and I'm not an expert at this, but I think it's like a quartz oscillator for. So instead of a balanced spring and wheel, it has an electronic heartbeat inside of it. But all the other parts of the watch are mechanical. They're all gear trains and such, as in a traditional watchmaking sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so they made that as a new kind of special kind of watch.
Well, yeah, the Japanese,
Seiko.
The Japanese are very, they're all about precision, and what the Spring Drive does, and also what quartz does in general, is it creates a higher beat rate. The beat rate is basically how many tick-tocks, so it's one oscillation.
Okay.
And an oscillation is basically, in a traditional watchmaking sense, it's the back and forth of a balance wheel. So it goes one direction and then the opposite direction. And then the balance wheel moves something called a pallet fork. So each time that pallet fork contacts something called an escape wheel, it creates a tick. And then in the opposite direction, it creates a tock.
Okay.
So when they say something has a beat rate of 18,000 beats per hour, it's basically 2.5 hertz.
Okay.
And basically the hertz is basically either a tick or a tock. So what that means, 2.5, is if you have to multiply it by 2, so you're basically getting five ticks or tocks in a second. And so that's what you're seeing on the watch dial face of the second hand moving. Man, this is getting really trippy and dorky right now.
Right, but there's somewhere out there, you have to know that someone is driving going, yes, finally I understand, or he's right. That's happening. Someone is yelling at their player. of whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
So
I dork out over this stuff, and it's my
yes,
wife.
Matt Kirshen would love. He was like, please talk to Arthur Trace about watches. By the way, I am talking with Arthur Trace, Trace, and there's an arthurtrace.com. He is a magician, and he is at Arthur Trace on Instagram. And it's delightful. Here are my 2 questions. The overwinding of watches. I remember my father yelling whenever, because I would want to wind it. He would take his watch off. I would pick it up. I would start to wind it, and he would say, "Stop winding it. You're going to break it."
Mm-hmm.
Can you break it by overwinding it, or was he making something up?
Short answer is yes.
Okay.
But the longer answer is not typically. So with something like an automatic watch, which you have to wind to get it going, but then once it's on your wrist, the motion of the rotor basically keeps it going.
Okay.
In essentially in a perpetual way, as long as you keep wearing it. With an automatic watch, there's usually a safety in there that will prevent it from overwinding. It's much easier to overwind a mechanical watch that's hand wound. Because if you do put enough force on it, you can break this spring essentially.
Okay, and then you have to take it to someone who knows how to fix such a thing.
Yeah, you have to get it serviced, and that's a whole other thing. Is every so often you have to get these things serviced because there's like little tiny engines on your wrist.
Okay, and do you take that back to the dealer, or can you go to any sort of cobbler?
It depends. I wouldn't take a watch with an in-house movement such as this has. So basically, this movement was developed by the manufacturer, in this case. So I wouldn't take that to like a local watchmaker because chances are they don't have the expertise to work on that movement. And even if they did, they would have to have parts available if they needed them from the manufacturer.
So if you've committed to that kind of watch, it's you go back to the dealer.
Yeah. Right. Or if you have a simpler watch, like the automatic one that I showed you, this has an ETA movement, ETA. ETA is a universal movement supplier that these movements are not in-house. They share movements across various different brands, and most watchmakers know how to work on those particular movements. So on that particular watch, I would just take it to my local watch repairer and say, hey, my watch is running fast, it's running slow. Can you give it an overhaul?
Okay. Yeah. I love that. And here's my other question. Have you ever seen the movie Defending Your Life?
No.
With Albert Brooks and Meryl Streep. It's about he's reviewing his life in sort of a purgatory kind of middle ground between reincarnation. And he is offered ground floor of the Timex Corporation. Mm-hmm. And he says, I would never trust the Japanese to make watches. You tell me you got a Swiss watch company, then I'll invest. Mm. And they mock him openly for a once in a several lifetime opportunity that he missed out on there. So like the Japanese started making watches after World War II. To your knowledge? I don't know.
I have no idea. I will tell you this though.
Yeah.
I now have to watch that movie, and I will tell you that the Japanese make excellent watches. This is another rabbit hole because before many people don't know this.
Okay.
But the best watches back in the day, the general consensus was that they were produced in the United States and Great Britain.
Huh.
Not the Swiss.
Interesting.
Yeah. It was only, towards like the early 1900s and then in subsequent years that the Swiss really came out as experts in making watches. And like the whole world of high-end or horlogerie watchmaking was focused in based in Switzerland.
Okay.
But now it's become a lot more democratized again because you have so many independent watch manufacturers. The Japanese, who said the line? Albert Brooks?
Yes. Well, Albert Brooks said something about the Swiss versus the Japanese.
Okay. The Japanese now, they make fantastic watches. In fact, Seiko, they have various different levels. So you have Seiko, then you have Grand Seiko. Grand Seiko is basically the mechanical watch and spring drive division who make higher end versions of Seiko watches. And then you have the top tier of Seiko, which is known as Creedor. Creedor makes some watches that are astronomical. We're talking about $50,000 and up watches that are just really works of art. So, the whole thing about watchmaking has now become a lot more democratized in the senses. The Swiss are still very excellent in making watches, but then you go to a place like Glashütte, Germany, which is the southeastern section of Germany. It's a small city, but it has very much a watchmaking culture. So you have brands like Langensohn, Glashütte Original, even smaller end brands like Nomos. They're all in Glashütte, and they make excellent watches. So the Germans are very good at making watches.
Right.
The Americans, there's a guy by the name of Roland G. Murphy who started a company called RGM. And obviously his namesake, and he produces some excellent watches. He produced the first serial movement in America since I think the 70s, when watchmaking kind of became a lot of the watchmakers like the E. Howard Watch Company, the Elgin Watch Company, all these great American watch manufacturers went out of business. So
what's how did you just describe that? He made a cereal?
He made the first serial in-house movement that's been produced in America since the 1970s.
What is a serial in-house movement?
So basically, if you, as a watch manufacturer, if you produce your own movement, if you become vertically integrated, you have
the mechanics, the gears and things that make got it.
So the movement, or as the Swiss like to say, the e-Bosch of the watch. It's basically, in layman's terms, it's the engine inside the case of your watch. Yeah.
Yes, that might have helped. Yeah. I'm better. I'm caught up. The engine.
Sorry, my mind is like it's
in watches.
It's not very good at communicating like the minutia of things that it's interested in. It just goes off and rambles on. So.
Well, no, what you have is minutia, but what you have is also a vocabulary of things that I don't. Here's my question about RGM: is that the Detroit company that I've heard so much about? The American watch. There's an American watch company out of Detroit that's supposed to be good.
That's Shinola.
There we go.
There was actually a big controversy with Shinola a few years back because they had put made in America, and a lot of their parts weren't made in America. And so I think there were some legal, some lawsuits.
Sure.
That they incurred, and basically they had to, they had to fix their situation. But I don't know too much.
Where's RGM?
RGM is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's actually where my wife is from, lo and behold.
Okay.
Yeah, and she grew up on a farm there in Lancaster, and she's been living out here since 2002 in LA. But when we were back there, I actually visited Roland's shop, and it was pretty interesting to see because he's this very small producer of watches. I mean, they only make about 800 watches in a year.
Wow.
And it's all very handmade, and he actually even has a tourbillon watch that he created.
What's that? What's a tourbillon?
A tourbillon is a complication that was invented by Abraham Louis Breguet in 1801. And the tourbillon basically counteracts the negative effects of gravity on a watch's ability to time keep.
Okay.
So back in the day when Breguet was making and designing watches were particularly in the form of pocket watches. So a pocket watch, when it's in your pocket, is generally in one position. And so if you can imagine the mainspring within the watch or within the engine of the watch, that's then letting go of all its power, and all that power is going through some gears and then affecting the balance spring, which affects the tick and the tock oscillations within the watch. Depending on how the watch is positioned in your pocket, gravity plays a different role on those individual parts. So if it's vertical, if a watch is vertical, then gravity is affecting it one way. But then if you lay the watch, or in Breguet's time, if you lay the pocket watch on the table, gravity is going to have a different effect on the movement because it's in a different position.
Huh.
What a tourbillon did is it took the balance and the escapement, and it basically rotated at 360 degrees within the movement of the watch. And what that did is it counteracted the negative forces of gravity on the balance
Of any
operation.
gravity. So
Of
it
any.
didn't really matter how you held the watch because the watch would continue to work.
Exactly.
In a very standardized way.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's very awesome. So RGM created the first American tourbillon in a very. In fact, I'm ashamed. I'm kind of embarrassed to say this. I don't know if another American company has created a tourbillon with its own in-house movement. So I'm sure they have, but I don't know that fact for certain.
No problem. If someone does know that, email me at jackie@jackiecation.com and I will forward it to Arthur Trace.
Just slap me across the face with that info.
Right. Just let him know. And so what? Okay, but I know that there's deep dives, but I have to ask about Rolexes. Just because it was the famous watch of my childhood.
Can you before you ask me that? Can I say one more thing about the tourbillon?
Oh, please.
So, most connoisseurs will say there's no purpose in having a tourbillon in a wristwatch. Why? Can you think of why?
Because it's always being held sort of in the same way?
Actually, the opposite reason, because your hand is always in a different position.
Oh.
So
well, then you would think you would really need a tourbillon.
No. You would only need back in Breguet's day. The reason you needed a tourbillon is because a pocket watch was generally in one position.
Okay,
and so
then if it went in a different position,
in a tourbillon rotated the whole mechanism in all various different positions, so it counteracted the negative forces of gravity on the movement. But because your wrist moves in various different positions, the tourbillon has really no purpose in a wristwatch. It's just basically something that's there just to say, hey, the watchmaker can do it. So it's a way of showing off in the modern age. Yeah.
Oh, very cool then.
Yeah. Anyway.
It's, a little flourish.
Yeah.
Well done. And it's watch flare, you guys. It has to be done. Rural Pennsylvania for the win. The Rolex, when I was a kid, my father, he has watches. He has one of those, the watch that you automatic. When you put an automatic. That's what. And he enjoys that. He also likes if you can see inside the mechanism.
Yeah.
Like this. Do you like that too, or?
Yeah, I love that actually. Like this, I'll show you this.
Yeah.
So that's literally you're looking like a little city within a case. It's just very detailed and there's if you have an in-house movement that actually has some really high degree of finishing, and there's various finishing terminology that watchmakers use, whether it's like the Côte de Genève or the anglage or the perlage or what have you on the various different bridges of the mechanism within the watch. That's kind of like indicative of the quality, the level of craftsmanship.
Yeah. And
that's a whole different other rabbit hole. And that's what I really kind of geek out about, because to me, it's really about the craftsmanship. But back to your dad and that Rolex.
Just and it's a quick tangential moment where I just find out about, like, all I know about Rolexes is my dad telling me that the difference between a fake Rolex and a real Rolex is that a real Rolex doesn't ever, the second hand doesn't stop.
For some reason, it doesn't tick.
It doesn't tick. It just it moves smoothly. And what is that called? Why is that good? Is that good? What is that? Talk to me.
Back in the day, back in the day, and your dad was right. Back in the day, the way to determine a real Rolex,
red letter day. Yeah, red letter day. Okay.
But the way you could determine a fake Rolex, or if as opposed to one actually that was really manufactured by the Rolex company, was looking at the second hand. And if it's swept, that meant that it was based that second hand was moving five oscillations per second, and so it gave the illusion of it sweeping. And to realize why it was 5 oscillations per second, you have to kind of break it down to on the beat rate. The beat rate of an older Rolex was typically 2.5 hertz, or 5 oscillations per second, or 18,000 vibrations per hour. Right. So that's why it kind of gave the illusion as if it swept. And that's why it was considered to be real, because people that were knocking off Rolexes years ago weren't using mechanical movements. They were using quartz movements. Quartz movements back in the day were typically just ticking and talking. So for every second, the second hand moved once, right, as opposed to five as opposed to 5 beats per second. So,
which is what created the sweeping motion, which is sweeping look.
Well, no, the sweeping look was created by Rolex by the 5 movements per second, whereas the quartz movement, second hand only moved once per second. Right. So essentially, it was not sweeping. And so back in the day, the way people said, "Oh, this is a fake Rolex," is it's a quartz movement watch. I don't need to see the movement. It's a fake Rolex. Now that you can't really determine whether a Rolex is fake or not based on that, because a lot of fake Rolexes have mechanical movements.
Oh, right. They were like, "Oh, let us course correct and try to sell you a gajillion-dollar watch for a nickel."
Yeah.
And but if you were to do you own the tools to open up a watch?
The watches that I own, no, I don't.
Okay,
and
because they're very specific, right? They're for the company.
They're very specific, and I would not want to open up my watches.
Well, it sounds terrifying. Like if it's like if they're fancy, or if they're very, very specialized mechanical, you're like, how about you don't open this?
Yeah, they just well, this is also another reason why I'm not a collector. I don't have enough money to be a watch collector.
Right. Not of the watches that you would want, right?
Yeah.
But this watch, to replace the battery on this watch, which has a very basic but very specific tool that is needed, has cost me in one place $3 and in another place $25.
Mm-hmm.
And it's literally, how rare is this device? And what can the market bear, as they stare deeply into my eyes? So it's kind of annoying.
So I would say, let's say you're up for, as a comedian, you're up for, let's say, this corporate event, right? And they I don't know, let's say,
I just did a corporate event. It was a gas station company.
Okay.
Very glamorous. Yeah.
And so let's say this company is comparing 2 comics, the Jackie-cations of the world, or I don't know, the prop comic comedian who's been doing this for 5 years.
Right.
And so a prop comic, and I'm not, this is nothing against prop comics, but back to my previous comment, let's say it's a bad prop comic. Right. And the level of writing is just not at the Jackie level. And so, this prop comic says, okay, I will do the 1 hour set for you for, I don't know, $2,000. Jackie comes out, I want $50,000. There is a world of difference of quality there. Now, obviously, everything's a matching game, so you got to pair everything up with what you're willing to pay from the client's perspective to the level of craftsmanship or work being delivered. Kind of the same thing with I'm guessing the guy that charged you $3 was some guy at a strip mall.
It was a pawn shop in Vegas.
Okay.
Which was funny because he seemed like the most professional of them.
Oh, really?
The woman at the strip mall, it wasn't a strip mall, it was the fashion mall in Sherman Oaks. And she said it was $25. And I was like, well, I need a new watch battery. I guess I'm giving you $25.
At the end of the day, I can't compare the two because I'm not a watchmaker, but I will say that there's some really janky people that work on watches out there. If that watch means anything to you, and this is one of the things I also love about watches, we have like an emotional connection. How many people have an emotional connection with their Apple Watch, and if
Right.
it's going to find itself into a landfill in 5 years,
Right.
So if you care about that item and you have an emotional connection to it, if you treat it well throughout the years, it's going to treat you well. So I would rather pay up for it and make sure it's done well if I trust the person who's working on it.
Right. And there's part of me that wants to actually, the next time I need a watch, take it to where I bought the watch
Mm-hmm.
and see if they want to just clean it up and just, essentially give it a tune up in addition to a battery.
Oh, most definitely. And even quartz watches, even though they have less parts moving around, they definitely need to be worked on, because I mean, I have a quartz watch from back in the day when I started performing in 2003. I did this Carnival cruise for a company who basically, this corporation rented out the whole cruise ship and they brought me on.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, I'm going to reward myself. I'm doing this high-end gig. I'm in my young 20s.
Treat yourself, right?
Yeah. And so I bought myself this little Raymond Weil quartz watch when I was in Cancun, at one of those Diamond International joints.
Yeah.
And it's treated me well all these years. And then 5 years ago, it was starting to act funny. So I took that and another watch to RGM to work on, and he repaired it for me.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
It's now, are there watches that okay, two questions. One, have you ever wanted to study watchmaking? Like, have you ever wanted to figure out how to work on watches? Or, I mean, your life, it's in your copious amounts of free time, Arthur Trace, which doesn't exist. So, but would that be something you would have liked to have done?
I think I'm meticulous in that way. Like with my act, I'm so meticulous, kind of like a watchmaker. Like everything, even the things I make, I'm kind of a craftsman when it comes to me working in my workshop, making a new prop, or
right,
if you will.
Because you make those, yeah.
Yeah, I could possibly see myself in another lifetime doing something like that. It would kind of be therapeutic, because I also draw and paint, and I know back in COVID, when I would do some commission work, I would just be zoning out for like 5 hours at a time, listening to a podcast or music while I work on the detail of this painting or something. I could see myself doing that. But truthfully, there's some things you just have to keep as fun and not become such an expert on it. Because I feel like with my magic, I have to be an expert on it because it's my livelihood. And in some sense, that kind of takes the fun out of it, It's kind of like if you like, drinking wine, and then you become like a sommelier. Well, then you just don't want to drink a bottle of wine just because to unwind. No, you got to study it, and it kind of takes the whole the fun out of it.
My mother-in-law for about 3 weeks was watching comedy specials on we have a very small house. And so we have a very large television, and she lives with us. And so I would walk through the living room, and there would be somebody else's comedy special. 4 or 5 hours a day, she would watch comedy specials.
Wow.
And it was a little triggering. I'm not going to lie to you. And I was like, no, I like this guy. No, he's great. In other news, I don't want to. Yeah. And
yeah.
So I get that.
Yeah, it's like when people send me something on social media, like, what do you think of this magician? Did you see that magician on AGT? Like, yeah, I just worked with him. Or what do you think of this act? I'm like, well, it's a ripoff of this act, or, yada, yada.
Right. Too much info will make you just sort of you're just like, well, I see what they're doing, and I don't want to belittle it because you had a good time.
Yeah.
And if you had a good time, that's also fine.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to stay in the room. How about that?
Yeah.
Is that an okay review?
Exactly.
I'm glad I hope he lives indoors and it's all working out for him. But I don't want to deal. Are there dream watches that you would, is there a watch museum? That's a different question, actually.
The American Watch and Clock Museum, I think, is actually in Lancaster.
Oh,
I believe they're actually in Lancaster. So yeah.
Well, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I would go to a watch museum. I would go to any museum. I'm in.
Yeah.
So, that's cool.
Every manufacturer also, not every, but a lot of the manufacturers like IWC or even Jaeger-LeCoultre, the watch I'm wearing. This one's an IWC. This one right here. It was actually founded.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it was actually founded by a Boston. He wasn't a watchmaker. He actually worked for the E. Howard Watch Company in Boston. Florentine Ariosto Jones, and in 1868 he founded his own watch company in Schaffhausen, Switzerland, which is the German-speaking part of Switzerland, right off of the Rhine. So he was an American who wanted to found a hydro mechanical plant for watchmaking in Switzerland.
Wow.
And so all these manufacturers like IWC or Jaeger-LeCoultre or Audemars Piguet or Rolex, they have their own little museums within their manufacturer. So if you're really serious about watches like I am, and if you ever visit Switzerland or any of these other areas that produce watches like Le Chute or even Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where that have a rich history of watchmaking, then they have their own museums.
Right. So when were you to go somewhere, you'd be like, TripAdvisor, is there a watch museum? And if there is, jackpot. You would dash off $7 or $17 to get in, because museums aren't that expensive.
Unless you're married and your wife has no interest, then you got to do it on your own.
Right. Sometimes Andy and I do divide and conquer. My dad's calling me. There it is. He's done calling me. Good. And because he knew we were talking about him. He does like a watch. He also enjoys a pinky ring. Here's the thing about watches that he always said, and I've heard this said, is that there isn't a lot of things that men can wear for dress up, that are nice acts. I mean, if you don't want to wear a tie, then you can't have 900 ties. And who does want to wear a tie? It's a little choky, but a watch, a ring, shoes. These are things that I have talked to that they're fashion accessories as well.
Yeah, like women have so many fashion accessories that they can wear. I think for men, like I'm married, I don't even wear an engagement band because I've, as a sleight of hand magician, I want my fingers to be all natural,
Oh, I was gonna say, why is that? Then I was like, oh, Arthur Trace is a magician. He needs his hands. He doesn't want anything just making everyone look at his left hand all the time. It'd be a terrible idea.
Right. But I also, you're absolutely right. But I also don't like jewelry. I won't wear a necklace. I don't consider watch jewelry. I consider it I consider it more of like a mechanical marvel that you can wear on your wrist. A lot of people wear a watch for a fashion sense. If I pick out a watch, the outfit goes around it.
Okay.
So that's how geeky I am. As opposed to it being an accessory, it's like a focal point for me.
Right, because you're like, look at how cool. To some extent, you're like, I want you to see how cool my watch is, and these jeans and T-shirt are fine. Anyway, so are there dream watches that you would like to have?
Yeah,
or like to at least see or play with, or
I do.
Stare deeply into their eyes. Yes.
Yeah, or just, well, I won't go there.
You and a watch alone.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have to be realistic about it because I'm not a rich man. So the watches I do have are nice, but I've saved up for them. And for me, it's not just something that, I can, Jackie, I'm going to go down to my boutique and buy this watch, For me, it's like, I study them. I save up for them. It becomes sort of like, oh, I really want this. It becomes a goal. So those goals have to be realistic. So there's one. So like, I'm not going to go out and buy a Patek Philippe perpetual calendar for,
how much is that?
$250,000 or something.
Oh no. If you'd like to buy a castle in Wisconsin, I can hook you up for the same cost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
but okay.
There, to answer your question, there are like the next one I would like is another IWC. Their Portuguese 7-day movement watch, which is just a beautiful watch with a rich history. So, just a very simple but really smart watch. So things of that nature. Yeah.
Do you notice watches on other people? When you're talking to them, you're just like, I mean, just in passing, but have you ever like met somebody and gone, look what that person is wearing? They're wearing a very, very fancy watch.
Yeah. When I'm with my wife, I point it out all the time. It's like,
okay.
Yeah. Like
there might be a reason she's bored.
Yeah.
But it is kind of exciting. I mean, to just go, honey, I don't think you see that guy. Look deeply into his wrist and see the fact that he's wearing like a $50,000 watch.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
And what about watch bands? What about you should get a choice when you buy, a several $1,000 watch. You should you
Yes.
should set it off nicely, right?
Yeah. I mean, so I'm more of a leather band kind of guy, although I'm not. I'm a big lover of animals too, so to me, it's got to be sustainably sourced in such a way that
Okay.
it's not like you're having like a crocodile farm and just and farming
Oh,
these animals out for watch bands. To me, that I'm not cool with that. But I do like I do like a band, not a bracelet. For me, it's just a
okay. You,
classier
you
way.
you don't like the metal.
The
You
metal
enjoy, yeah,
the metal is a great look, but I'm not like a metal guy, so
right.
I think the metal makes a lot of sense for like a sports watch, or it's living in California, it being like 100 degrees this week.
Right. And what about if you do a lot of dishes? Because we don't have a dishwasher.
Exactly.
That because I have another watch that just has a really cool face on it. It looks
Uh-huh.
sort of like a diving mask.
Okay.
And I don't even know what brand that watch is. All I know is that when I was 22 years old, my sister gave it to me and I was like, "Oh, cool." And and I
Yeah.
needed a watch
Uh-huh.
because it was pre-cell phone. I might not be super young.
Uh-huh.
And the but I don't like a leather watch because my hands are in water.
Yeah.
And I should probably take the watch off anyway.
That makes a lot of
But
sense. For somebody that is really into watches, such as myself, on a hot day, I particularly don't wear a watch just because I don't like the feel of the leather against my wrist. And
and
so,
and what and you just check your phone for time.
yeah, or I'm usually working, on the weekdays I'm working from home, so I have the time on my computer
Okay.
screen. But if I'm going out to, like, my wife and I just went to see Howard Jones last week.
Oh, fun.
Yes, and so yeah, I'll wear out a nice watch for it's an event, and I like to do my part,
Right, dress it up a little bit.
yeah.
Bring it. What if you ran into Howard Jones and he was a watch guy?
We
You don't
actually did
know.
run into him. We went backstage, so that was a
Oh,
lot of.
that is cool. Is he a watch? What was he? What was he? Could you see if he was wearing a watch?
He was not wearing a watch, but I don't blame him because he's pretty, being a rock star. If you're on stage, he's doing a lot of sweating.
Right. A
Yeah,
lot of pretty sweaty stuff.
yeah.
It's okay. Well, we're pushing an hour here. I know that there's 1,000 rabbit holes that you were not allowed to go into to tell me about watches. But is there anything that you would like to tell me about watches that we did not get to
I think
offhand?
I think a lot of times people think it's about materialism or being materialistic or what have you.
I'm sure it can be. Sure.
It's there's certainly that aspect of it where you can kind of I've been into this for such a long time that for me it's and for a lot of collectors, or in my sense I'm not a collector, but for a lot of people that are into this, it's kind of like I said before, it's like the emotional connection that you make with these certain objects. Because if you're getting married, you're wearing a watch, that's going to be kind of reminding you of that particular memory. Or
Right.
that Seiko on your wrist. I'm sure you have plenty of memories of you washing dishes.
Yes.
or,
Nobody does it better.
or what have you. So it's kind of like these things that tell the time. We take them places on these little adventures, and they have their little moments that we can kind of go back to into our headspace and connect with it on that level. And that's what I really find fascinating about it.
Yeah. And they are I am married to a guy that can't stop collecting things. I am surrounded by board games and Hero Clicks and Hot Wheels, and and it's just something that he likes to collect things, and he doesn't. It isn't. I mean, I don't know where I'm going with
If you
this,
get
except for
joy out
that.
of if you get joy out of it, even if you're a
Yeah,
collector, if you get joy out of it, hey, more power to you. And it's like
right.
even the watch collectors, if you get joy, a great joy of getting that next watch, more at the end of the day, you can't take the stuff with you, but if you certainly get joy out of it, why stop?
Right. And I do wonder if people who do just like the look of like as a status symbol, or just I like the look of that watch, I'm going to get a knockoff. This is what I do. I do own knockoff Yeezys. They are tennis shoes. And my friend Anna was in Bangkok, and she knows that I like Snoopy. and they have Snoopy on them. But what they are in the case of knockoff sneakers is that they're usually made they're usually real in the way that they're made in the same factory.
Mm-hmm.
They were just stolen. They just fell off a truck.
Huh.
And so whoever is selling them to you in Bangkok found someone who worked at that very factory. So you're getting the same item.
Interesting.
But the person who made it is actually making $11 instead of $11 a year.
Uh-huh.
So there is some self-justification in that. And I didn't buy them at all. But I wouldn't also want to spend a lot of money on a product from that particular famous person.
Yeah.
Just because he's trouble. He's in trouble.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's a mess.
Yeah. I think.
But,
yeah. It's kind of like one of the reasons I don't drive a Tesla is because I'm not in agreement with this person's, sort of social, viewpoints. But that's another topic.
Right. It's a complete other topic. Though electric vehicles, do you like the idea of an electric vehicle? As a gadget?
It's an interesting. It's kind of similar to a quartz watch as opposed to a mechanical watch. And what happened with the quartz crisis, which actually Seiko started in 1969 with their Astron model, and basically by the early 1980s there was something called the quartz crisis because quartz watches were prevalent and mechanical watch manufacturers were going out of business. And it's because of the this new technology of quartz timekeeping technology that mechanical watchmakers were going bankrupt and people were buying more and more quartz watches as opposed to ones handmade. So as far as cars go, I think we're going into a similar sort of thing where guys and girls that are actually really into cars, they're like, no, I want that gas guzzling, engine roaring, what right. I'm not a car guy, so I don't know the terminology.
Right.
But similar thing. Whereas no, I want that electric car that, is much more fuel efficient, if you will.
Right. I don't mean to be cool, but I love the idea of filling up for $7.
Yeah.
Energy doesn't come from rainbows.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a nuclear power plant 18 miles from my house.
Yeah.
So it's not like, fossil fuels has its problems, as does nuclear power. But as a gadget, I think it's interesting. Someone was explaining to me that the difference between like a Tesla and a Kia is that Kia made regular mechanical cars for decades, and Tesla made computers and working on new batteries.
Yeah.
So if you work on computers and new batteries, you throw them out and you start again. You buy a new computer every 2 years, every 4 years, every 6 years. With a car, you don't buy a new car. You get a new car every 10 years, or you never get a new car until it falls apart. And so when Kia makes a car that happens to be electric, they're making a car that happens to be electric. When Tesla makes a car that is electric, they're making an electrical item that happens to be a car.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So the encouragement that what I was told is that I should buy an electric car from a car company, not an electric car from a battery company.
Yeah, and Tesla's also that's absolutely right, and
that seems interesting. Yeah,
and you actually this is similar to, as we were talking about watchmaking, but the level of finishing on a movement. You look at the level of finishing on a Tesla car where the panels don't align properly. I mean, it's really pretty shoddy workmanship. Where you compare it to like my,
because they're not that excited about the car.
Yeah, I have a Toyota RAV4 Prime, which is a plug-in hybrid. It's like the best of both worlds.
Oh yeah.
And so I got that car because I don't think the charging infrastructure is there yet. Plus, if I have to drive to a gig to, let's say, Palm Springs or something, I don't want to be worried about a charging station or whether my hotel has a charging port.
Oh, I have a new bit about them trying to rent me an electric car and me not knowing how to make it work. And then
plug it in, Jackie. You plug it in.
Plug it in. You just got to find a place to plug it in. Do you have an outlet I can borrow? I'm sorry. I'm just used to. Anyway, this has been a delight, Arthur Trace. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
for coming on the Dork Forest. Arthur Trace is a magician, and he is spelled Arthur, Arthur, Trace, Trace, and there's an arthurtrace.com. He's on Instagram. Watch him do magic. And this has been a great discussion about watches. So thanks.
Thank you, Jackie.
You're welcome. And Rangers, you know the rules out there. Take care of each other.
Hi, Adal. How was the show?
Well, it was wild. It was Arthur Trace is a magician.
Okay.
And he is not a comedic magician. He says magicians who claim to be comedians have to be as good at comedy as they are at magic, in his opinion.
Yes.
And he finds Derek Hughes was the one that we talked about.
Okay.
And he said, I am a magician and I'm entertaining, but I am not a comedian.
Right. He's
And
just
so-
a funny...
He's just compelling and interesting.
right.
And of
Okay.
course, occasionally funny, right?
Right.
Just like people. But he's
Right.
a very good magician. And he doesn't collect watches, but he knows a great deal about them, and he owns several watches. So we
Okay.
talked about kind of the history of watches.
Oh, all right.
Right. The wristwatch and the Dutch, and then
Right.
it went from automatons to clocks.
Okay.
And
finally
and-
somebody said, I would like to have one of those on my person.
and it was World War One.
And there was a lot of talk
the
about
trenches.
wearable clock making.
No.
No.
It was trying to get all of the soldiers to come out of their trenches to die at the same time
Oh.
in World War One. So they were
So-
all issued a watch.
And everybody had to learn how to simonize their watches.
What is simonize?
Isn't that what?
Synchronize?
Yes, but there was some old show where it was a comedy show, and they always had to simonize their watches.
I don't remember.
I forget what show it was.
That's awesome. But we talked about many different ways. He said he cannot collect watches because watches are very expensive,
Right,
especially
right.
the ones that he wants.
That is a rich man's hobby,
Yes.
collecting watches.
So he saves up and he saves up and he saves up, and then he buys a fancy watch.
Okay.
And then he was wearing one that he told me the name of, cannot remember, might have been Jaeger LeCoultre. Wow, did I massacre that name?
Yeah.
In other
probably
news,
not that.
I showed him my Seiko, and he said that he thought it was nice. Yes.
So I think the traditional way of presenting your collection of watches is inside a trench coat, right?
Right. If you just open it up and go, these are Rolexes. I did tell him that my father told me when I was a kid that you could discover if a Rolex was fake if the second hand moved and it wasn't a sweeping. There was a lot of watch
if it
words
ticked over
Yes.
instead of gently glided around.
Yes. And then and so Arthur Trace of arthurtrace.com, he said yes, and then the fake ones figured out how to do that.
Oh, okay. So you can no longer tell that anymore.
No, you'd have to open it up and look at the mechanism.
Okay.
And then he said it would be pretty obvious pretty quickly, just because the mechanism is so fancy.
Oh, I see.
Right. But it was a fascinating episode.
I'm never going to open up a watch thinking, I wonder if this is a very expensive watch.
This is his dorkdom. And I asked him if he ever did like what he did for new batteries. And he said, I would take it back to where I bought it. Just because it's easy to break a watch if you don't have the right tools. And also you should and he was like, you should get this watch. I should get this watch kind of looked at, and we'll see. I mean, it's not a bad idea. Just sort of cleaned up and made nice.
Yeah. Why not?
Why not? They do a nice
that sounds
job.
like something that people do with their spare money and time.
Right. But he was fascinating. He mentioned many watches, most of which I cannot remember the name of.
Okay.
And he had a watch that flipped so that he could have 2 time zones.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
And it was a rectangle.
Right.
Yeah.
You didn't have to do the math.
Right. And he said that there were other watches that had world time on them where many different, it was a lot more hands, I think.
Oh, okay.
The watch he was wearing did look very cool, though.
It seems to me like you just need more numbers around the outside.
Maybe. Yeah, that's probably what it was. Less hands, just more numbers.
Right.
Just another row of numbers, Jackie.
Yeah. That would
to
be...
tell you where Paris
how
what was
I would think
happening
about
in
doing.
yes.
Yeah.
Mountain time. It's all working out.
Right.
So well, it was a great
neat. That
episode.
sounds great.
Yeah. And Rangers, you know the rules out there. Take care of each other.
My hat, my hat, my hat. They're dancing around my hat. My hat, my hat, my hat. Well, what do you think of that? If it looks like a Mexican hat dance and it sounds like a Mexican hat dance, it's most likely a Mexican hat dance. So take off your hat and let's dance.
Yay! Oh my God. Why don't we just call that as the end of the show?